Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we are talking about deep cranking in the fall. We're talking about different styles of crankbaits and some really unique tricks that you can use to catch more bass. Now in the fall transition, all the way until the heart of fall. These bass are going to be making moves, chasing bait, and a crankbait will help you get those fish. We've done a handful of videos about the fall transition now, and thus far, everything has been focused around the shallow fish, getting up around grass, around structure, fishing docks, drop shotting, underspin, still throwing frogs, all those different things. Well, today we're headed the other direction. We're going to talk about those deep water fish and what they're doing during the fall transition all the way through the fall as you head towards winter. So what I've got here is quite a few different baits. First, I'm gonna walk you through the baits. These are the baits that I have the most confidence in this time of year. We've been expanding a lot over the last couple of years, trying different models of baits to find actions that are different or unique. So I'm going to give you that. After that, we'll talk color, and then I'm going to give you 3 very specific tricks that you can use to catch more and bigger fish this fall by deep cranking. Little tweaks, little tunes that you can do that will put more fish in the boat. And then finally we'll end with gear. So let's jump into the baits. If I had to start anywhere, if I was just going to call the standard, I would reach for a Strike King. 6XD, 10XD. Those 2 baits right there can get a guy through almost everything. They are fish catching baits. Now the 10XD takes a little bit more specialized equipment. It's a bigger bait, it's heavier. The 6XD you can throw on just about anything. Size 2 treble hooks, fishes really well. 10XD you're talking 1/0. You got to put a little more effort into it, but these are fish catchers. Both baits get down deep. Again, we're talking about those deep fish. Where do you do this cranking? Where are these deep fish? Well, depends on your lake. But where you want to start your search is deep rock. And the term deep is relative. On your lake, deep rock might be 8 to 12 feet. On another lake, it might be 15 to 25 feet. And on another lake, it might be bluff walls that reach all the way out to 200 feet of water. It's completely relative. But anywhere that you've got those fast transitions with big rock, that's what you're looking for. Now, can a crankbait work on a mud bottom? Yes. Can it work for suspended fish in completely open water where you never even touch bottom? Yes. It can do a lot of different things, but it shines on rock where you get this darting and bouncing motion as it's going through the rocks. You'll get more bites. So the first one is a 6XD and a 10XD. And I keep my colors very basic this time of year. We're gonna circle back on color, but you'll notice it's pretty simple. The second one, this is a Zuma, the Z-Boss. The 22 and the 24 are both baits that I really like this time of year. I really like them during the summer, or excuse me, the spring to summer transition as well. You guys saw that earlier this year. Got a big one on this exact bait out on Lake Gunnersville. But these baits shine even more this time of year. See, it's the farther we get into fall, the bait fish, now whether that's shad or shiners or any variety of dozens and dozens of different bait fish that could be in your lake, they're going to gather in the fall. They group up. As the water temps cool, the bass push them up and they eat them, but they also corral them deep, especially as you go into winter. They corral them really deep and they hold in those pockets. These are the baits that are going to reach down there and get a reaction out of the fish. It's no different than what we do in the shallows. You know where those bass get up dirt shallow, the bass are blowing up on them. We've been talking about throwing top water, then dropping subsurface, then getting down below them, crawling bottom with an underspin. You can catch all those fish. Well, the same thing is taking place. Bait balls are in deep water and the bass are ambushing them. You just don't see it. You can see it on your electronics, or if you don't have electronics, what you do is you just fish the likely places. Focus on that deep rock. When you start catching fish, you know you found the mix. And typically these fish won't move very far. Especially, I mean, here we are in September, headed towards October. In another month, they will pretty much be settled. So a month from now, if you're on it and you're catching them on that deep crank and there's bass around bait, they've already sort of found the bulk of their winter haunts where they're going to be sticking around. They're not going to go anywhere, and it will be a very consistent pattern. So again, that is Zuma 22 and 24. Another one of my favorites that I built a ton of confidence in this past year. Next is the Sixth Sense. The 20 and the 25. Huge size difference between them. I've done more damage with the 20, but that 25, very similar in size to a 10XD. Same profile, similar dive depth, both catch fish extremely well. So why am I showing you two baits that are almost the same? Well, they're size-wise are the same. Color patterns, very different. Sound, quite a bit different. So if you're on a fishery where a lot of people are cranking, as you know, because we talk about it all the time, different is good. That's why I'm giving you some options. If everybody you see is throwing a 6XD, don't throw it. Throw one of these other offerings. But if you're the only guy out there cranking, keep it simple. You will catch a ton of fish. But this one right here, this particular color I really like. That Fantasy Shad did really, really well with that earlier. 3 more for you, and then we're going to start. We'll talk a little bit about colors, and then we'll get into those tricks. This guy, very different bait. Berkeley Dredger 25.5. This is a very deep running bait, but it's small. I mean, fairly similar dive depths, and look at the profile difference. This is a bait that will get down there, stay down there, but it's a smaller profile. So if there's not big bait fish in your lake, that's an awesome option. It's a very different sound. Higher pitched, almost a tin sound to it. It's very different than what your fish are seeing or hearing day in and day out. Again, different is key. For each one of these baits, down in the video description, I'm going to break down the baits for you and some color recommendations, so you don't have to try and keep track of any of this. Next, this guy right here. Boy, I think half of us, me, you guys, half of us grew up throwing this bait, a Norman DD22. This bait was catching fish when I was a little kid. It is still catching fish today. Fairly dull sound, great depth. It gets down deep, it stays down, it's consistent. You have to tune them a lot. And by tune them, I mean if a bait runs off to one side or the other, we have videos on how to do this, but just a very brief version. If your bait runs off one side or the other, you grab a pair of pliers, grab onto the line tie, and if it's running this way, you just barely, and I mean barely, if you can see that you made a change, you went too far. You just barely take it the opposite direction. Just bump that line tie opposite of the way it's tracking wrong. So if it's doing this, you bump that line tie that way, and it'll straighten that bait out. If you go too far, it'll go the other way. You need to bump it back. So a Norman is a bait that I knock out of tune a lot, but it catches a ton of fish, and they're really easy to tune. I mean, it takes seconds once you've got a handle on how to do it. Really, really easy. Comes in a bunch of great colors, and it's a very inexpensive bait, which is awesome. So you can save a bunch of money, catch a pile of fish. It's a very consistent bait that's been around forever. Then last but not least is this guy, very different. The reason why I talked about this one last is because it's gonna take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole. This is a Megabass Deep 6. A little bit different profile, a little bit skinnier all the way around. Narrower bill, narrower body. Just comparing it to some of the other baits so you can get a feel for it. Here it is compared to a 10XD. That bait will catch them when some of the others won't. This bait has a, I would say, standard sound. Nothing special, just a deep knock to it. But it has a very tight action compared to some of the others. Action is something I want you to pay attention to this fall. As you're trying different baits, you'll have baits that catch fish. One will catch them one day, another one will catch them a different day, and as you progress through the season, you'll start noticing these changes in which baits seem to work the best. Some of that is sound, some of it might be color selection, but a lot of it is action. Some baits, like these two, 10XD, that big Sixth Sense, those baits wobble really wide. They've got a ton of movement to them. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got that guy there, where it's much, much, much tighter. The dredger, fairly tight action. That's why that smaller bait can get down so deep. It's not fighting itself as hard. Your other baits are going to fall somewhere in the middle. So pay attention when you start finding that one bait is working better than another, because as your water temps cool, and I'm not going to give you hard set numbers. I'm not going to tell you to make a change at 55 degrees or make a change at 65 degrees, because there's a lot of variance and fish differ lake to lake. The general patterns work, but the very specific times that they make moves can differ. So don't get caught up with water temp, especially if you're a guy on the bank or a guy that doesn't have great electronics. Don't worry about water temp. I care very little. I let the fish tell me what they want. But you will notice a trend will begin that leans toward tighter actions as your water temps are dropping. Don't be afraid to follow that trend. Now, color. Keep it simple. Right in the beginning of the fall transition, we're throwing a lot of those just really solid, bold colors. And those are going to be the types of colors that I recommend down in the video description, with one exception. As you start getting later into the fall, the first tip I'm going to give you is don't be afraid to look at red. Red. Okay? This is the first tip that can completely change your fall fishing. This is a 10XD that is custom painted. Strike King used to make all bait fish colors, nothing craw in the 10XD. So we were getting them custom painted to look like craws. Well, now fast forward, Strike King makes a perfect one. You don't have to get custom painted anymore. They were on it. They made a dynamite color. I love a black or a brown fading into that red with or without an orange belly. But if it is an orange belly, I like that duller, almost rust color. It works so well in the fall. There's a deep 6. Black fading into that red. So why red? What's the deal? Because typically when you crank, you're talking bait fish imitator. That's what you're doing. You're just cranking that thing. It's down there digging around, bouncing. Those fish are down there ambushing shad or other bait fish. They just lash out and eat it. And we'll get into the specifics of how to work it too here in a second. Well, the reds are imitating craw, right? Now, I told you a lot of your cranking is going to focus on rock. There's a DD22 as well. Norman has like 3 or 4 really good craw colors, but again, I'll link you my favorites. Back to why this. So, you're imitating crawdads, which are in those same rocky areas, and the bass gorge on those things in the fall. They're just gorging up, headed into winter. But there's a second factor that has nothing to do with crawdads, and that is when your crankbait gets really, really good. When you're cranking and you're just catching fish. You found a school, you throw that thing out there, burn it down, and you're just sticking them. I've found that if you stop and switch to red, when the fish are aggressive, when they're really feeding hard, that the size of fish magically goes up. You won't catch as many, but it's almost like they're seeing red, right? Like a bull. They're already worked up, they're mad, they're eating that crankbait every time it comes by, and you put a red one down there, and they just come unglued for it. I don't know why, but I've consistently found that I can catch a really big one on red. So that's your first tip. Second tip that's going to stand out and make you completely different this fall. Now, it's not going to change how many bites you're getting. It's going to change how many fish you put in the boat. That is that I want you to focus on your hooks. It's not glamorous, but it makes the biggest difference with cranking more than any other technique. It matters for everything. You need to be careful with hooks on every bait. Don't trust stock hardware. Don't trust that when you hook a giant fish, somehow it's gonna come and get in the boat. You put all the time into gear. You take time off work to go fishing. You've bought all this equipment. Don't lose a giant fish simply because you have a garbage hook on. Make a change, upgrade. Upgrade your split rings. Owner Hyperwire split rings make a huge difference. They're consistent, they're strong. But let's talk hooks. So standard hooks look something like this. Stock round bend. On this particular bait, on the Azuma, it's a strong hook. It's a great hook. This one too on the dredger. These buggers straight out of the pack are so stinking sharp, they will hurt you. But they're round bends. If you want to land more fish, you go to a slightly tipped in bend. Notice what the sixth sense comes with stock, a tipped in hook. It just keeps more fish pegged when they come up to jump. It really helps. So what hook should you be using? Make this really easy for you. If you think you're catching smaller fish, I'm not gonna put a number on that, that's up to you. Smaller fish, Gamakatsu makes the EWG treble. The EWG, now they don't make it in the giant sizes. In giant sizes, it's a little bit up in the air. But in all your standard sizes, they make an EWG treble with a really turned in point. It's very, very similar to that hook that comes on that sixth sense. Very curved point. It will do a dynamite job. They're sticky sharp, they hook up great, they keep fish pinned. But if you're gonna catch giants, or you think you might tangle with some giants, go with an Owner ST56. That's their 3X treble hook. And I know I'm covering this stuff quick, but again, you know it'll be down there, don't worry about it. The Owner ST56 is also a curved in point, not as aggressively as an EWG, but it is curved in, but it's made of a much stronger wire. So those are my two trebles. EWG, if I'm catching a lot of numbers, but not necessarily giants, because those little, it's thinner wire and it sticks them and it keeps them good. But if I think I'm gonna get into giants, that Owner with that heavier wire is dynamite. Last little bit on hooks is red. If you want to land more fish this fall, put a red treble on the front. Now, they don't currently offer, hopefully a hook company out there is watching this video, no one currently offers a really good red hook in the big sizes. You know, 1/0, 2/0, those sizes, nobody's got a great one right now. But in all your smaller sizes they do. A red hook will go a long way for helping you. Now, why does it matter? What's it do? When the fish is coming in to eat the bait, I believe that even though they're coming in hot, they're looking for something to hit. They're looking for a point of impact. And they're coming in alongside this bait and they're gonna hit, and the first thing they see is that red one flashing. It just gets their attention and they aim straight for it. So you end up with the red hook in the mouth and the outside hook somewhere else. Or it'll end up T-boned across the mouth, one in both sides. What you don't want is if you're throwing just black hooks, it will happen a lot. Sometimes you get them good, but a lot of times, because it's just a gamble where they hit, you'll end up with them on the back hook and all this out in front. And when they come up to shake and all that's out in front, it'll pull itself right out. So that red hook does a really good job of getting them to eat the bait completely. And then when they come up to thrash, the bait doesn't move and doesn't shake and doesn't rip itself out. So again, hooks make a huge factor, or a huge difference. Number 3, the last tip I'm gonna give you. I have actually gone to doing a lot of my cranking on fluorocarbon because it's simple and it's consistent. For my smaller baits, I throw 12 pound. I use Sunline Assassin, I throw a 12 pound. For bigger baits, I use either 15 or 17. That'll get me through just about everything that I do. But this time of year, if you want to catch more fish, I switch to braid. And some guys go, braid, you can't crank on braid, you can't do it. You know, they just freak out. They won't even listen. Well, I'm telling you, it makes a difference. You don't want to crank on heavy braid, 30 pound at the heaviest. I mostly use 20. But what you do is you use braid with a little bit of a mono leader on there. The mono will be what's down there rubbing rocks. And mono does really good in the rocks, so you're not gonna get cut by the rocks. But why braid? Here's the deal. If you're cranking on fluorocarbon, there's quite a bit of stretch in the line. And then there's quite a bit of stretch in the rod too. I told you I was gonna circle around and talk to you about how to actually work it. So the thing with a crankbait is distance is everything. You wanna get the best reel that you can afford for the technique to get extra distance. Because the farther out, the farther down. The longer your cast, the deeper you will reach. The deeper you reach, the more fish you can catch. Because I can take a crankbait and throw it shallower, but you can only get it so deep. If there's fish deeper than that, you're missing them. So the game with a crankbait is always trying to get deeper. So the best reel that you can afford for the job will make a big difference. But when you bomb that thing out there, make a bomber cast, and then I crank really hard in the beginning to get that bait started. I want to get the steepest dive angle headed to bottom that I can get. And then once I'm down there, I can slow down. So you'll notice a lot. We throw them out and burn, burn, burn. Sometimes you'll even see us pumping, trying to get that thing down. And then we just start fishing normally. So that normal retrieve, you're just down there bumping bottom. It's deflecting, it's jumping off of things, and you catch fish. Just steady retrieve. But again, the game is getting deep and getting there as quickly as possible. So if you're using fluorocarbon with that soft crankbait rod, you'll notice a lot of Tim and I's fish are not on a steady retrieve. Whether we're throwing a square bill or a deep crank, you'll notice a lot of this stuff going on. And I hesitate to even teach this because it works so well. But you notice we stop, we pause, we do different things to try and get a reaction because it changes what that bait is doing underwater. Well, if you're using fluoro, you're burning along and you just pause briefly and then continue again. There's so much stretch in the line and the rod that it just absorbs that pause. The bait never even feels it. The bait will just be kicking along and maybe it'll slow down just a little and then it's back to kicking. But if you switch to braid, circling back, this is a Bantam HG. That is probably the baddest cranking reel you can get, by the way. It is not a cheap reel, but incredible distance, bulletproof reel, and this one is spooled up with 20-pound braid with a short 15-pound leader, about a 6-foot 15-pound leader. So my bait down there is hitting with 15, but my main line is 20, which is incredibly thin. So I'm still getting ultra deep. When I'm cranking with this and I pause, the braid has far less stretch. So when I pause, the bait pauses. So instead of having my bait kicking through the water and then it just kind of gets a little weird and goes back, this thing's kicking and stops. Kick, stop, kick, stop. When you make a move, the bait makes a move. It's much more aggressive, it's much more reactive, and the fish will lash out and eat it so much better. Now there are days where just that steady retrieve gets them, and you don't need to do anything. But sometimes when the going gets tough, you need to be different, and braid will help you do it. A guy can be doing everything right, but doing it on the wrong line or the wrong rod where it's absorbing his movement, and it's all out the window anyway. I hope those tips help you. Now, as far as rods, the bigger baits, they need some dedicated gear. That Dobbins 805 CB, we have smashed so many big fish on that rod. It's really, really good for the 10XD size baits, those giant baits. You guys know though my all-around favorite rod is that Zodiac 7'6" medium heavy. Because that's this one. I can throw the giant baits on that rod, but I can also get away with throwing the lighter baits on that rod. Well, that one is back ordered right now. And you might be surprised to know this. If you guys have watched this for a long time, you know how passionate Tim and I are about swim bait fishing. I actually own more crankbait rods than I do swim bait rods. Because cranking, it can be as easy as I own these two rods. And I throw my giant baits here, and I throw all my crossover and smaller baits here, and some of my giant baits too, and that's it. And it works. But if you want to go down the rabbit hole of deep cranking, you can own 14 different rods that all have very specific jobs, and it really does matter. You really will catch more fish. But for the average guy, you buy one rod and move on with your day and you're good to go. But as a result, I've played with a ton of different rods. So the Corrado has a rod, and again, I'll link them down in the video description, but the Corrado is a little bit less expensive than the Zodius, is in stock, and is a dynamite option for throwing the gamut. And then the other one that really, really stands out is this Loomis, the 906. Now they make bigger and smaller. They make all the way up to an 8-footer. They make down to, you know, square bill rods and lipless rods. But that 906 is an in-between rod where if you throw the biggest baits, if you go to throw a 10XZ on it, when you make your cast, it feels overloaded, but it will throw it. But when you're cranking, it's perfect. Because even though it's got this really light tip section, you see, I don't know if you guys can even see that in the camera, but super light tip section, when you're cranking, the rod's already bowed up. So it doesn't matter that the tip section is light. When a fish eats it, they hit the butt section of the rod. That's the last part to load up. So you can stick them on a big bait on a fairly light rod. But then on the other end of the spectrum, as you're going to your smaller baits with smaller hooks, less of that rod tip is already loaded because the bait's not digging as hard. So when a fish eats it there, they're eating it literally on a softer rod and it hooks them up perfect. So different rods for different budgets, but you can really fine tune this thing. So again, I'll link you those 3 or 4 rods down in the video description that have made a big difference for me. Last but not least, storage. This is the box I brought all these baits out here with. There's 1,000 different ways to store a crankbait and people get so fancy with it. This is the Deep Plano waterproof. I go waterproof because of the time of year. Storms happen and I don't want to get all my stuff out of the boat all the time. I take out all the dividers and you just pile them in. Do they get a little bit hooked to each other? Yep. And it takes 2 seconds to unhook them. This is how I store my crankbaits. The vast majority of them. There are exceptions, but this is pretty much what I do. Guys ask all the time how we store our baits. I mean, you're watching me put them away right now. That's a wrap. If you take the dividers out, you can pile some baits up in these boxes, and then they're waterproof. You can see your baits, you can pick the one you want, and when you go to grab them, they might be a little bit stuck. They come right out, don't worry about it. I keep it really, really simple. Don't get complicated when you're in the boat. Keep your tackle management simple. Guys, I hope this video helped you. If it did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video with your friends. We are here to help. That's why Tim and I do this. I just get so passionate about this stuff. I thought this video would be shorter. Thought it would be a 10 or 12 minute video, but once I get rolling, I want you guys to have so much fun this fall. I start talking crankbaits, I can't hold it in, and there is so much more to teach you. Tim and I are going to get a lot more in depth with cranking over the next year. It's something we do a ton. We want to share with you, but this is going to get you going this fall. You can catch a lot of fish doing it. You can catch giant fish doing it. It's a blast. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll talk to you soon.